No, it didn't. Good. Uh, so welcome everyone. We're going to learn about the permit process at the City of Eugene today. And so we have students from commercial buildings. We have students from construction, I think. Um, our lead drafting instructor, Mark D'Onofrio, is here. Yay. And our cooperative education coordinator, Shamra Clark, is here. Hi, Sham. And is Paul here? Paul Ray, the construction instructor. And huge thank you to all you city staff from the Permit Center. Thank you for rearranging your schedule and spending part of your afternoon with us. Really appreciate that. So, is Kendra here? Was going to introduce her. Kendra Hostetler is the plan review supervisor. Well, if not, who wants to be the MC for us?
If Kendra's not here, I mean, I don't know whether I should be taking up that role, but I can.
Go for it.
Um,
Sure.
and I guess before I get started, I am substituting for Maria, who is my colleague, and in commercial plan review, and we also do the project coordination in general from the city side. So I'm not sure 100% on what you're looking for. I wasn't completely looking at that, but if you just want kind of an overview of each of our jobs, I guess.
Yes, an overview of each of your jobs. And if someone came in for a plan review, what could they expect to, what process would they go through?
Great. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's start off with yeah, coming in for plan review. What that means to us, at least in our jurisdiction, is we are online. It's all submitted through our e-build system. Um, and so getting the documents together that convey that particular project, um, an e-build account is created by the applicant, then um, application is filled out in that same process, and then those are all submitted in there. It goes, actually might, who's here from intake? John. So maybe John could then go in and describe, comes in intake, you get a submittal, what happens from your point of view.
Yeah, I can give a little bit of overview of what intake does here. I'm John Davidson. I'm with the intake team for the Permit Information Center with PDD, Planning and Development. So yeah, I mean, intake kind of is a kind of like a jack of all trades, so to speak. We kind of dip our toes into everybody's ponds in terms of like knowledge and information. Knowledge in like public works, land use and planning, erosion, and then a little bit of like plan requirements for our commercial and residential projects there for our plan reviews staff. We review trade permits, like over the counter permits that don't require plan review. So like if you need like an electrical, plumbing, or mechanical permit that like a ductless heat pump or something, we process those. Um, we do a little bit of like e-build problem solving slash tech support, both on the employee end and the customer side. So we do a lot of navigating or helping people navigate when they're submitting their plans and submitting for a permit application. Um, but yeah, as Chris was saying there, we're kind of the first line of defense in terms of when you're submitting for a project. We do all our permitting through the eBuild portal. So like the first thing you would be doing is making an eBuild account. Once you get through that, you'd be um, filling out an application for let's just say you're doing like an addition. Fill out a residential addition application, upload your plans to the plan set, and then once you submit it, it gets into our intake queue. Once one of us has time to get in there and to review it, we'll review it for completion. We don't like review stuff for like whether it's like applicable to the code or like, suffices for the local codes and everything. But we'll review it for, if it's a new building, for instance, we'll be like, okay, make sure it has all the stuff that a foundation plan needs to have, elevation plans, site plan, and so on. And so we review all of your projects for just completeness and making sure it has all the plans and all the details that typical project that is within that scope of work purview would need. And then once you have everything that you need, we have a few stamps that we put on there after our review, just to kind of show that, hey, it's been reviewed. Hey, don't forget to call 48 hours before you dig, stamps like that. And then we pass it on to the next stage of review, where the plan review staff will get it, like Chris was saying. They'll usually project coordinate, and we'll usually, depending on what the project is, we'll be the ones that are like assigning, or not assigning, but just making sure it's routed to the right people, depending on what the project is. Some departments may not want to see it, and some departments may need to see it. So just kind of navigating that, and yeah, making sure it sees all the right people. And then after that, I believe it's the plan reviewer that kind of takes the reins, and
Yep.
in terms of
Yep.
like project coordination.
So that comes back to my, so after he gets done, he sets up the software so we can see it. Then it comes to my desk typically, and my team's desk, and then we'll take that and we'll say, okay, if it wasn't some certain projects like that he was talking about, intake will assign who needs to see it, but in the typical larger projects, that'll be my role, and it'll be like, okay, of course, land use, public works, the fire marshal's office, um, and let's see, occasionally there's somebody else, but not very often. Then myself, and then of course in Eugene, the commercial plan reviewer also has the mechanical plan review for that thing, but sometimes we also need electrical or plumbing plan review, and we'll include those in the list of people that need to take a look at the review of the package of submitted documents. So from there, I'll set that up. We do have some sort of general goals on how long our first and subsequent reviews are, that we've kind of set to try to meet. Most of the time, obviously, some things come up occasionally and we can't make it, but most of the time we end up making our goals for those review times. And then after I've kind of listed everybody that needs to look at it, then I guess the only other thing that comes up sometimes, one thing that you always catch, John, is whether you needs an erosion permit associated with it, right? So if that gets toggled where erosion needs to look at something, or erosion permit might be required, then that sends out a notification to the customer that they're going to need to do that, and then they'll submit an erosion permit, say similar to what they do for the commercial construction permit, but then it'll go through Ed, and Ed can talk a little bit about that.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So just half a step back. So the City of Eugene has a permit with the Department of Environmental Quality for our storm and sanitary system. And the stormwater system, our system, goes out to the local streams untreated. So part of that permit we have with the state requires that we have an erosion prevention program that regulates construction activity to minimize the impacts from construction to the storm system. So the erosion prevention permit is how we do that. So it's a companion permit to the building permit. And that permit has to be reviewed, approved, and the initial erosion prevention and sediment control measures installed and approved before the building permit can be released. Because once the building permit's approved and released, then work can start. So we have it set up so that those protections are in place. So it'd be things like filter inserts in the storm drains, or sediment fencing or other sediment barriers around the perimeter of the site. So when they have it all opened up, we don't have mud, sediment, concrete, washout, paints, plasters, any of those kinds of construction related materials entering the storm system. Because again, that system goes right out to the stream untreated. So we're kind of the environmental regulatory arm of the city with regards to construction activity. And we interface with other environmental related permits like wetland fill permits. Those are regulated by the state and Army Corps of Engineers, but we coordinate with those other permits, make sure that what we're approving is consistent with those. Our team also serves as agents for the DEQ on larger construction sites. So say a large subdivision that requires a state permit because it's so big, it's over an acre, it's 5 or 20 or 50 acres. Those are big project sites. And so those require an erosion permit by the state. Now we have an agreement with the state, with the DEQ, that we serve as agents for them. So we issue those permits for them on their behalf within our jurisdiction. So we're kind of the one-stop shop as far as the erosion permitting goes. And again, we interface with some of the other environmental regulatory permits. But the whole goal is protecting the city's stormwater system and the natural resources they discharge to, wetlands, streams, creeks, et cetera. So defender of the local waterways, that's a role that we play.
Right. Thanks, Ed.
Mhm.
And then, like I said, I usually, most projects, especially if there's any site work on them, will end up going to both land use and public works. So who wants to talk next?
I can go ahead and give my spiel. So I'm Kelly Whitmill, and I'm a land use analyst. I'm also an associate planner at the City of Eugene. We Eugene is a little unique in that we have planners in our building permit department that do the building permit or the land use review at the time of building permit review. A lot of jurisdictions you may find have a separate review required for some of your projects ahead of building permit review. It depends on the jurisdiction. In our case, if there is an approved land use application that's already occurred that came up with how the site is going to be developed, or if it's just a permitted outright use in the code, it goes straight to building permit, and that's when I perform the review. So in this case, depending on the project, it's based on the zoning of the project. The zone will determine what development standards apply, and there may be overlay zones that then have an extra set of regulations that I'll look at. We also will look and determine if there was a previous approval. For instance, some properties in Eugene have an overlay, like a site review overlay, that would mean that there might be a site review approval required by our planning team up prior to their submittal of a application for a permit. And so through the permit process, we do look at the things like height, setbacks, landscaping, things like that. I would say it sounds like there's commercial and residential interest in this group, Margaret. Okay. From my perspective, something that I will try to instill is that a lot of times there's assumptions made about land use as far as zoning or what that means, and we play a big part in the site aspects as opposed to the fire life safety piece of it that Chris will talk about. So we play a big piece that is so critical in how you approach the project site-wise, that I would say it's just critical to start with what's the zoning and what are the local regulations related to development standards to make sure that you're on the right path with, is there an overlay that there was a land use application that we need to go through, or is there an existing land use application that we should be referring to make sure we're consistent with that approval. That's critical to your success in a project. And then there's all those layers, and then there's just the code layers. And I would also recommend, if you don't ask and you're unsure, don't make assumptions. You can reach out to us, especially, I'm assuming all jurisdictions have the people available, but we are more than helpful to answer questions about land use and how we can help make your projects a success. So do keep that in mind as you move forward in your careers or whatever aspirations you may have, I guess. Or if you are interested in being a planner, that's also a possibility. But anyway, I can't think of anything else right off the top of my head. Am I missing anything, Chris?
I don't think so. I'm sure Mark and the rest will have some questions for us. Dan, you want to share kind of what you do?
Yeah. So I'm Dan Shelton. I'm with Public Works. We used to be kind of nestled under the Public Works Engineering Department, but we've been moved over to Building Permit Services with Public Works to kind of integrate a little bit more closely with kind of the building heavily involvement of our job. We also are another team that has a very wide spread of our review. We are responsible for reviewing for the federal, the FEMA special flood hazard areas, which have first a checkpoint to see whether its building sites are within those higher risk flood areas, which then trigger a whole series and cascade of building requirements. We also review for stormwater. So we're another team that's involved with trying to protect the waterways. There's several kind of code languages that provide guidance to what type of development triggers either enhanced treatment or how does runoff from impervious area make it to a destination that reduces risk for the greater community. All those are kind of reviewed at time of permitting. Also a good idea as we're kind of framing this for your future careers, as you know, to reiterate what Kelly said, it's always good to get as much information ahead of time to avoid your permitting fees for either yourself if you're managing your own company or your employer or whoever. We offer project consultations where you can come and kind of bring some preliminary plans and we can kind of highlight some ideas and issues we see and give you some early guidance. We also have the counter at the Permit Information Center that you can come in and have kind of some early stage questions and answers with us in front of a computer. Stormwater becomes one of the big things that people miss. You're thinking about building the building, whatever that is, and the runoff sometimes becomes secondary and forgotten. We also review for system development charges. Those are a fee that are assessed at time of permitting. It's not a permit fee, but it can be a very large chunk of the fees that are incurred at time of permitting. They're collected to allow the city to capture capital to expand capacity of numerous systems that will be impacted by future intensification of whatever is being developed. It includes wastewater systems, roadways, the parks, etc. We review kind of access connections and access management. How do vehicles move from private property onto our public roadways? There's some design standards around that. We are reviewing for wastewater connection points to the city system, providing guidance to that. I'm sure there's more that's just really broad. We also, outside of building permit, if you're going to be becoming someone who's going to do work on sideways or just building access connections, we'll be the team that will be working with you and providing guidance to that. And again, leverage, if you're going to work in the city, kind of what resources we can provide and try to make your process as smooth as possible. We're there to help.
All right, thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to actually thinking as Public Works just now too, they also deal with all the right-of-way issues, like if there's a right-of-way closure that you need for during the project or whatever. And the reason why I'm thinking of that now is because as a distinction from the being building work on private property, typically, we don't regulate, the building code doesn't regulate building in the right-of-way, just so everybody knows that. Um, so that's why I was thinking of that right now. Building code review and mechanical code review, which are the two parts of that portion of my job. Um, in building code review, we're looking at mostly, well, fire life safety for sure, because that's the main thing. Fire life safety means, which involves not only just like which portions of the buildings need to be rated walls or frames or protected openings, but also the means of egress, how those work together. And then, accessibility is another portion that we look at that's pretty big. Accessibility, meeting all those standards for all the portions of the building that are required to be accessible. And then another big portion of us is energy code and meeting that, and that changes quite rapidly as technology and that code advances. The requirements keep getting stricter and stricter, which means it's more and more nuanced and how that's applied and how it can be done to meet the requirements. And then that would be the bulk of what I do in the building code side, and then on the mechanical code side, it's generally covers, of course, your mechanical equipment, your HVAC systems, but it can also cover things such as walk-in cooler is under the mechanical, even though there is a little bit of energy code portion of that that's tied into the building code, and then there other items would be something like one that you wouldn't think of, but is exclusive to Oregon, is fuel gas piping. Oregon has decided to incorporate that into the mechanical code, so they combine the International Mechanical Code and the International Fuel Gas Code into one, and all under mechanical permit. So we'd also we look at the sizing and the layout of gas supply piping as part of that portion. As a project coordinator, on top of that, and, I talked before about how I kind of set it up so each of the other teams, whichever ones are applicable, would be involved in this, would be notified. But there are some cases like plumbing, electrical, where it's not required to have plan review, but there's still a permit required, and so certain fees. And so I'll review whatever plans we have in the applications and then set up those permits if it doesn't require plan review by electrical or plumbing, which would mean notify the inspectors, because in Eugene, our electrical and plumbing inspectors if plan review is required for those disciplines, they would do those reviews. Let's see what else. And then after everybody's kind of gone through their whole review, say the first review, we kind of, everybody's made their comments, because we're doing this digitally. We use Bluebeam as the main markup tool. So all the documents to Eugene get submitted on PDF, individual files. We put our comments, or before issuance, if we have some items that are revealed during the review that are not either not code compliant or questionably so, we may ask the question about, hey, what's going on here? This is the code section, and there is a cite it, write it rule, at least for building code stuff. I'm not sure if the other disciplines also have to meet that, but I do. And and it's basically citing the code section that you're using, or that this issue revolves around, at least one of the code sections, and then that gives at least the customer some idea of, hey, they can research this section themselves, figure out what to do differently if they need to, or they may say that they interpret it differently with us and talk with us about it, and that's fine. Happens quite often, actually. anyway, collate. So all that comes in, it's set up in the system. Everybody's done with their first review. Then as project coordinator, I'll send the plan review letter out. And with our system, it's pretty easy. It's just one extra click of the button there and a couple other little admin things. And it goes out. It sends it to the people on the e-builds on the project from the customer side. And I also get notifications of all those emails sent by our system. And that plan review letter will have the list of every discipline and what those comments are. And then it'll also have copies of the sheets in which we put the markups on. So if they want to open those up and look at and see where we put the markup, because sometimes we use arrow leaders or bubble rounds that help clarify what we're trying to ask. And then those go to the customer and look at those, make their revisions and get done and resubmit as a response to the plan review letter. Then I see that come up in eBuild on mine. I get a little yellow notification across it. Then I know that I have to organize the resubmittal with the original one, get it all packaged up so I can then do the same thing I did on the first one and distribute and notify all the teams, let them know that their second review is available for them to start reviewing again. And we do this process over and over until all of the issues where we have all the main things that would hold up issuing the permit are resolved. Now we may have some other things on there that we just put on as requirements, extra little markups that are there for that have to be followed as part of the construction thing, but we don't necessarily need the applicant to spell everything out all the time for us. Once all those issues are cleared, every team has approved their portion of the project. I'd go through and I'll look through the fees, make sure that I might not know exactly like SDCs, exactly how that should be calculated or whatever. But I look in there and see if everything looks like, nothing was forgotten or anything looks way out of line. I might go to Dan and say, hey, could you check in on this? It seems a little awkward. For those fees, of course, I'm responsible for the building and mechanical fees themselves. But once all that's done, I can get the permit into an approved state, and that notification will go back out that the plan review is completed, go out to the customer, and then from there, they have a couple little items, finish paying fees, making sure all the contractors are assigned for each of the trades that are involved. So if you have a plumbing and mechanical contractor, as well as your building contractor, you'll have to have all three of those assigned, not just the building contractor. And then once those things are done, the system will automatically issue the permit within about a half hour. And then they'll just move on from there, and it moves on to now it's an issue permit instead of a permit application that was still in review. And then I don't know how far we want to get into like the inspection side, but that's after permit issuance. It's kind of we'll still have portions of us come through, because if there's a revision during the construction process, we'll take those in. People can submit those. I'll assemble that out and do the same thing we did for the first and other reviews, is just kind of get those to each person that they're appropriate to. And then we go through, they review it, either approve or markups, and then we send a plan check letter or approve it there and move on. And that's kind of the gist of what we do. I mean, of course, there's other things. They're much deeper, phased permits, multiple buildings on a site, and a whole bunch of nuances, but each of those will be different with different jurisdictions on how they handle that.
Chris, I'm going to guess that some people would like to know just a little bit about the inspection process.
Yeah. Okay. So for us, as much as I can tell you, so once it's out of it's actually approved and issued, most of the bulk of the work is going to be in the inspectors and inspection support hands, although I'll still be involved a little bit. But what will happen is one thing I forgot to mention is I'll enter into a list all the inspections that I know of that are applicable to this project. And then there'll be a couple for land use, and maybe public works might have a couple. but I'll probably do the most of them and building, and then our structural plan reviewer will add some more for the particular parts of the structural system. But I'll add it and for mechanical and plumbing and electrical, depending on whether I did this, if I did the permit setup or they did that. But all those are put into a list that are associated with the permit. And then a contractor can, for a specific permit, can then request an inspection, and it's usually the next day. They usually do it the day before, and then inspect that. Call that inspection. Our inspectors see all the requested inspections in the morning, kind of get their assignments, create their sort of what the route they're going to be taking to go to all these, and then they'll go do their inspections. They'll take notes, put notes in the inspection log, and all that stuff, and they'll either mark there's reviewed, denied, there's there's definitely approved, and there's a couple other things that they can mark it as, and I don't know enough detail of that to give you any more. But each trade will have their subsidiary, their range of inspections, and then they'll have a final inspection. So like mechanical might have the inspection for the installation of the ducts, but they will have a final mechanical at the end to approve the mechanical trade portion, or then the building will have the same thing. The last one that can be approved that actually finishes the permit is the building final. Other things that come up during that time that are available, like sometimes we'll have a building that's 99% complete. There's a little portion that need to work on over here, but all the fire life safety stuff's complete, and they just didn't do a little cleanup. They might ask for a TCO, which is a temporary certificate of occupancy. And at that time, the inspector and the building official decide whether and the inspector's taking the lead on this at this point. They'll decide whether that's appropriate, and they might have conditions. And they say, okay, you can grant that, and those currently renew on a monthly basis at like $300 a month or something like that. And then that's how that's handled. And then when the final building is approved, then inspection support goes through, make sure all the fees are paid and everything else, and then they can final out the permit. It'll be closed and finished.
So Chris, I want to just jump into, because the erosion permit's that companion permit, sure. And I didn't close the loop on that. So the permits are tied together at the beginning, the building permit and the erosion permit. Once they're both issued and active, they kind of run their own paths. So building permits, getting inspections for all the various components of that building permit. I do routine inspections. We call them routine inspections, periodic spot checks, just to make sure that they're staying in compliance with the permit. Oh, your fence is down, you need to fix that, or you need to sweep the street because there's mud in it, whatever it is to minimize those impacts to the storm system. At the end of the project, you can have the building permit closed and have full occupancy, but still have an open erosion permit. And what we need in order to close that permit is that all of the construction activity is done and all of the exposed soils that were generated during the construction process be permanently stabilized. So landscaped, covered with building, concrete, sidewalks, whatever. And we'll do, and on all those temporary measures, the protections in the insert in the catch basins, the stormwater inlets, fencing, all of that stuff has been removed. So there's no temporary measures and everything's permanently stabilized. Then we close those erosion permits. But they are kind of tied together at the beginning, but they run their separate path during the construction activity. And on a big subdivision, we issued those DEQ permits that I mentioned earlier. So it's a 50-acre site or whatever. That permit stays open until all of those houses are built and all of them are landscaped and everything's stabilized. And sometimes there's a stormwater system cleaning that needs to happen. They need to vacuum out catch basins, or maybe even jet clean the storm lines if things really got messy. So they can have the building done, but they still got to meet the erosion permit requirements, because again, we have a permit with the state. And so, we're under obligation to make sure that we're protecting that system so that we're in compliance with our permit with the state. That's all I got.
So this gives us a commercial perspective. If someone is doing let's say, a design build on a single family residence, how will the process look different for them? I know that's not your side of the house.
It isn't my side of the house, but honestly, from the customer side, it's not a whole lot different, I don't believe. There might be some who does which portions of which review, maybe land use and public works, and well, we don't have a resi person online, so I don't know where sometimes they share who does which portions. But as far as the submitting your application and submitting the documents, and then the timing of how the plan review works, and the plan review letter, and then the eventual approval, and then paying the fees and the contractors, that's all the same. Just the scope of work, and there might be a few nuances on who assigned does what. Like I was saying, for electrical and plumbing, I might do the electrical and plumbing permit if there's no plan review, but I don't know about the resi side if there's something that they do that's just a one-off thing. Like, okay, we do it here, but we don't normally do that for bigger projects.
And the same is true for erosion permits too. It's just smaller project site, but we still do the similar kind of reviews. And also, we, City of Eugene, also issue permits to ourselves. So if our parks department wants to build a new park with a new bathroom and all kinds of things, we'll permit those as well, along with the erosion permitting. And it's all providing protection for natural resources. That's my piece, but then building code side protections, make sure that structures are safe.
Yeah, and from a land use perspective, yeah, a lot of times it's just, the residential are simpler, but there are still a lot of times when there are things to consider, like CC&Rs that we will not, that would be important to know through the design process, but we will not regulate. And things such as a lot of properties are in subdivisions that have specific regulations. So it might seem that, oh, it's just a straightforward single family dwelling, or I'm doing an addition, but it could be that there's a resource on the property, trees or other natural resources that are required to be preserved and fenced off during construction. There are other considerations as well. So it's always important to verify the zoning and verify whether it's part of an approved plan unit development or has some overriding rules that regulate those type of things. For us too, we do split up our plan review a little differently. So if a project is a simple, straightforward project that doesn't have maybe the extra layers that I was referring to, the residential plan review team actually does the land use review portion. So our residential team will do the simpler projects as far as height, setbacks, for single family dwellings. Of course, not for commercial. Commercial is a whole other thing, and then we review the more complicated ones.
Thank you.
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I was understanding there's a lot of drafting in this class, so I do have one little thing I guess I would say is that you're communicating not just to the contractor, the construction documents, you're communicating to us also. So they are a communication device, and we don't necessarily know your project inside and out, except for what we can read and see on the drawings. And so just keep that in mind while you're developing what you're developing.
That's a good reminder, because our role is to confirm that what you're proposing is compliant with the applicable standards we each review. And so it's important to start with, do I know the standards, and how do I communicate that in the documents that I'm providing, so that staff can then review accordingly. And so that's the back and forth sometimes, right? Because, and I think too, depending on the size of the project, I'm imagining they get into it and then in their head they know the thing, right? Like, well, of course we're doing it this way, but it hasn't quite been translated to the plan set yet. And so that's the back and forth. It's like, oh, what are you doing with XYZ? It's unclear. Could you please clarify? Chris is right. We're supposed to cite it right. We're supposed to provide the applicable code section so that the person who's responding can have clarity on where that came from and what the specific code is. We should be providing that because if we can't cite it, then how are we requiring that, right? Like what's the requirement that we're making if we can't cite it? So that is an expectation.
Mark, did you have a comment?
I just had a question actually related to the review process and that some municipalities outsource some of the plans review pieces, and it seems like everything the city of Eugene is large enough that you guys all are things that the review process is staying all within one place. Is that correct? And then the other question was related to something Chris was talking about, which is this communication process and drawings being a way that we communicate intentions about a project. And I was just curious, what are some of the common mistakes or things that get missed that you see over and over again that you would wish just people would stop submitting these things without them, right? I think Ed and Dan talked a little bit about stormwater. Everybody forgets that, which admittedly that was, it's oftentimes furthest from our minds, but again, the impact of it is so huge. So I was just wondering if you guys could touch on some of those things a little bit.
Okay, I'll start a little bit, at least on the building code, the specialty code, Oregon specialty code side, so building codes and that stuff. We typically do not outsource anymore. Like prior to hiring Andrew 10 years ago, they did outsource a lot of structural. And then when Andrew got hired, and then a couple years later, they created the structural position and he went into there. Then they kind of quit outsourcing. And then now Andrew's moved up to building official and we only have one structural reviewer. If he gets overloaded, we still have the contact to outsource it, but we don't use it very much. Like it may or may not happen in a given year. Another one I know we outsource, and maybe Kelly can think of another one, is when we get the cell tower changes to the antennas, there's a noise component to that. And I don't know exactly what that report is, but yeah.
We just hire a private consultant for a very specific portion of telecom review because our knowledge is not such that we can confirm another professional's assumptions. So we do, that's one, but that's just specifically for telecom.
And that's the only two that I know about that I can think of. I don't know if Public Works has any that I haven't heard about any. But there may be something I don't know about.
We don't typically have referrals outside of the city. We might have referrals to other teams, like specific over like public works engineering. I can think of an example like with some of our public slope easements, which are in place to ensure city infrastructure in the right of way is protected both during and after construction. No one on our team is a licensed geotech engineer or structural engineer. We have some PEs over in public works engineering who can review another professional engineer's work and just kind of say, yeah, this passes the test of our logic and it makes sense and we believe it's going to work, but we're not sending anything out.
Yeah. And Dan reminded me, there are a couple other things that aren't outside of the city, but they do go to the other departments that we don't normally typically run into. Like if a building's historical, we'll go to a portion of planning.
Yes, we'll deal with
we'll deal with that. Yeah, and you can talk a little bit if you want. I don't know if you guys want to go into that stuff with the adjustments and all that.
Well, more than that, no, I think more, but so planning, so there are a lot of other city departments that we definitely work very closely with, planning included. But what I was thinking too is another consideration, and fire isn't represented today, but we have two deputy fire marshals that are on that do plan review. And so that's also a consideration. There's times when, especially with, well, commercial, a whole other level, but for residential, I would say there's a lot of times now where people are building in situations where there might be an alley, not improved alley. There will be some situations with the infill that we're doing now that require sprinklers because there's not access, or there at least it requires the review to determine whether there's appropriate access to the site without a sprinkler, or whether sprinklers are needed. Or there's also the requirement to look at the fire hydrants and request reports from EWEB about fire flow to determine if there's enough flow in the hydrant to for fire staff. So that's something that is a consideration as well in your preliminary research for your project.
Yep, all that. Sorry, I'm glad you brought up the fire marshals because I totally forgot to bring them into this. They are, Springfield, Eugene, combined fire. We have two deputy fire marshals here that do the plan review. Another thing they look at is their access to it, and especially when the eave height gets above, was it 30 feet? I don't remember. They could tell you, but they have the ladder access to the roof, or whether they need aerial access. So there's some things that they look at on all the building plans when they come in for new buildings. And then, of course, when the sprinkler plans or fire alarm plans come in for a building, they'll do the reviews on those particular pieces. And then a few other occasional things, uh, diesel generators, emergency generators, propane tanks, those kinds of things are kind of in their ball of wax for a lot of that stuff. So they definitely participate in this quite a bit.
Chris, I want to jump in too a little bit. We didn't really talk about enforcement stuff, and most of the folks in BPS don't, but we do have a code compliance team upstairs that will respond to complaints or investigate maybe construction without permits, or those kinds of things. That's kind of a different work group. But my work group, we do the full spectrum stuff as far as erosion goes. We do project consultations, so consulting with designers before they come in for permits. We do permit review, we issue the permits, we do inspections, and then we also do enforcement related to the erosion ordinance. And as agents for the DEQ, we're kind of mandatory reporters. So if we encounter other violations, say the project's filling wetlands outside of what we know as their wetland fill permit with Department of State Lands and Army Corps of Engineers, will do referrals to them or the DEQ. So we're not, asking for them to review something, but we'll say, hey, there's this activity going on that may be in violation of your permit, and then they can engage with that contractor. So there's also the enforcement piece that. Again, this work group doesn't do too much, but we do have those folks in the building. So just, again, enforcing the code, making sure that everything that's going on within our jurisdiction is compliant with the applicable regulations.
And then back to Mark's question, what are some common mistakes you see?
I could hit on a couple, at least that we see in intake. I'd say like the most common mistakes we see like have to do with like the site plan, and just details on the site plan. If you're gonna be doing work in the city of Eugene, I recommend just looking at our website. There's a wealth of information you can be looking into in terms of like checklists of like what we review on certain site plans or different projects and different plans associated with the project. But I would say the two most common things that happen or that we kick a plan back to you for corrections is if the site has easements, for some reason those always get missed. And then our public works team likes to have the elevations on the site just to know where like either 2-foot contours or like what the elevations are in the corners of the lots, just to know where the stormwater is going to be running to. on the site. But yeah, I would say those are the two most common ones that we always see. The easements portion isn't notated on our checklist, but that's one thing that we do require on our, if it has a site plan, we require the easements to be on the site plan.
Can I weigh in real quick?
Oh, yeah.
Because something that does come up, and that's so interesting, because what we will get, and this is more residential, but we will get a site plan that will show there's a significant slope. And then we will get elevation drawings showing that the lot is flat. And so how do you get from there to there? And so that's an important key piece. Exactly. Are you stepping the foundation? Are you building a retaining wall on so that the land will be flat? That's critical components to how we do our review. For instance, we review building height, and it's based on a dimension 5 feet from to lowest side. And we can't, if you're on a sloped lot but showing a flat, elevation, it just doesn't work. So that's just another one.
Are surveys required with building permit applications, or is it just a site plan that the?
Can I speak to that, Chris? So the key is we require that that the property owner know where their property lines are. We do not require a survey, but the expectation is that you know where your property lines are, and then you demonstrate on the plan where all the buildings are in relation to property lines. That's another thing I think that is overlooked, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like a lot of times people make big assumptions on where their property lines are. It's the fence, it's the edge of the sidewalk. The property line is in all kinds of places related to the street. It's almost never exactly where the fence is. But we don't, and then people might expect that, oh, I drew the drawing and the city will tell me if I'm not right. And we do not review to verify that you showed the property lines in the right location. So we try to educate, especially people who are doing work for, just trying to do the thing by themselves and not hiring a design professional. We try to educate and say, do the best you can with figuring that out. And if, at the very least, have a conversation with your neighbor about assumptions. But because if you're showing that you're 5 feet from a property line based on a fence, and then the fence is not at the right location, you're missing the setback, right? But it's ultimately on the property owner. So that's, yeah.
And if you miss that and build on their property, we're not going to enforce it most likely, and it could trigger civil, however that shakes out, and that gets messy and not fun.
But we will enforce if it's has to be a rated wall because it's close to a property line, right? And all of a sudden, we have to change but then the inspector goes out there, and it's after people are halfway done and say, no, this wall needs to be rated. You're less than 5 feet from this property line.
Well, at that time we would regulate it too.
And then that's how they're going to change. Yeah, it's assuming that land use wasn't even a land use issue. It was just a building issue, because both of us deal with that property line in two different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the building inspectors will require that the builder or homeowner string a string line if they're, I think, within 10 feet of the property line, but they're doing that representing where the property line is.
Where they think it is.
Now I will put a qualifier in, and Kelly, this kind of is in a little bit of your realm too. So we have some projects that will have designated conservation areas, or a natural resource, a wetland or something like that. And those aren't straight lines, and they're not, a certain distance from the property line or whatever. And so in those cases, I oftentimes will require the contractor to have a surveyor come out and at least stake the boundaries in the field so that we know where those are, because especially if they have a wetland fill permit, they have permission to fill a certain amount, but nothing more than that, because to fill wetlands you have to pay offset mitigation credits, which are really expensive. So much per acre of wetland that you fill, you pay into a fund, and then that fund is used to create high quality wetlands off-site. So you have a permission to fill so much. And if you go beyond that, then you're out of compliance with not just our permits, but also the state and federal permits. So sometimes we do require that, but typically we rely on the property owner, the builder, to provide us that information, and the inspectors that information.
Yeah, and I would like to just follow up to that. Yes. Typically for residential projects, a lot of the resource stuff, we have enough information to not require the surveyor. the exception would be like if there's some large subdivisions that are being built out, and at the time, large subdivisions, they will require, they already have a surveyor on the team typically, and they will typically, mark the location of the resource fencing, and we will require them to show that a surveyor did do that. But that's very large projects for like subdivisions that are just doing some of their, street grading and things like that, and utilities prior to actually building a building on it. But yeah, there will be times, I guess, thanks for clarification, that a surveyor may be required for that type of the resource protection, as opposed to just property lines, for residential project.
Kelly, earlier, you mentioned if someone wanted to be a planner, I can't remember what you said after that.
Oh yeah, we all have, like, I think there's people working towards in your team. I'm not sure, like, are you working towards working for a company or maybe there's people who are contractors who are doing design, but I myself was not educated in planning. I worked my way through to become a land use analyst, but planners, of course, are, there's a great program at the university to become a planner. And then that's the dealing with the land use codes, and that's more working on like land divisions and land partitions. Although, like I said, I'm a planner just in a different role. I'm the one that makes sure that the plans comply with development standards. But
sometimes people go ahead.
There's all kinds. The great thing is there's a variety of roles. Like Ed, right now they're hiring for a new erosion specialist. So, and I don't know what background that would take, but yeah, we all have different backgrounds.
So my background is land use planning. I have a degree from U of O in planning, and I started in planning at the city. I did that for a few years, and then I moved over to this position, which doesn't require a planning degree, but it helps to have that to understand how development happens. So there's a lot of different paths to get to these different positions, and gaining skills in those different areas, however that is, internships or volunteering, or some work here, some work there, all goes together to give you that set of skills to be able to do those different jobs.
I think that's a good point for me to wave one of the flags that's big for me, which is maintain interest in learning throughout whatever you do, because things are changing really fast all the time. You don't know where you're going to end up. You've started a path, but it's going to change. You don't have to know what you're going to be as your final thing. Just keep learning and follow that if you can,
Those are wise words. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amen. And actually that I know we're getting up to I think we're actually at time, but that was one thing I was going to ask about, was how do you keep up with the constant code changes and all these kind of, it's just constant learning, right? Like that, and educating, I think, people who are submitting drawings, right? It's a little bit of back and forth between you guys, I imagine.
It's constant. We are in a state, I would say right now, and I'm pretty new on this side of the regulatory cycle. I came from the private side, submitting plans to different jurisdictions and stuff, but with middle housing going on, everything is highly in flux at this state, more than I've seen in the 2 years I've been with the city. And we have stormwater manuals being updated, stormwater code being updated. How are we going to allow different standards for development, for more density to evolve and change? And they're constantly being challenged. So, and then you pair that with how technology is evolving, and how will AI change how we do reviews or create plan sets, and all of these different things are all happening at a rate that you get to drink the waterfall as much as you can.
Absolutely. And most professions require, continuing, development, activities. And so that's going to conferences and those kinds of things, also a great way to, learn what the new thing is that's coming down the pipe. Right. So yeah, it is a constant process. That's for sure.
Can I add one thing real quick?
Please.
I know it's yeah, just that, and we recognize because ourselves where because we hear this a lot. I think that though that doesn't make sense. Like, and we recognize that. So sometimes the code isn't updated as much as we like, and sometimes there's times where the code is updated in a way that then makes another section of it go, well, why? What that does? Yeah, why is that? And so it's just the nature of the beast. And so just recognize that even yeah, some things may not make sense, or you may be frustrated with things. Sometimes the process is slower than we'd like as well. and
And we
and
didn't
there's
write it.
different
We're
regulatory,
just
we have local
enforcers.
codes and we have state, and so but it does keep our jobs interesting. Like, yes, very interesting.
Yeah,
Mark, anything? Oh, sorry. Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say there's a whole, at least on the building code side, there it's a little different because they adopt the state adopts standards typically for IBC or whatever, and the IBC has its own code standard change that it goes through. It has big committees and you can be involved in. You can submit your revisions and have it voted on. Then the state goes through its process of adopting that and what modifications to that code it wants to make. So they go through and do that. And then there's a lot of input from the public on that portion of it too. And then it finally gets approved, gets adopted, and then handed down to us on our portion.
Right. To wrap up, I just want to, for people who are going to watch this recording later, and Noah and Thomas, you're here now, I just want to underline a thread that's been running through all of this presentation, which is how friendly and accessible the city staff are. You didn't blow your own horns, but that has come through in the way you're talking, that we don't need to feel confused and intimidated because you are here to help. And that's really good to know.
I've tried to tell some customers past, it's not getting a permit isn't a test. It's a conversation.
Oh, I'm going to write that down.
Oh, that's so true, because I feel like people make, they hear things and they make assumptions about the city and the regulation, and it's like, but we're just trying to help, really. Right. I mean, we do regulate, but we're trying to help too, right? And we're open for the conversations, and we're open to give you information to help you. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and there are not so great players sometimes that try to, they're afraid of the government and sharing certain things and omit things, but really just throw it all on the table here so we can work around whatever it is. But sometimes there's folks that want to try to game the system somehow, and again, we're here, we're the government, we're here to help, right?
And in this case, that's actually true.
Yes.
Well, thank you for spending part of your day with us. This was really generous of you. And I'm going to predict that this is the high point of oh, yay. This is the high point of the term for us, honestly, being able to hear from you.
Well, I'm glad that you take the opportunity to reach out, because we appreciate it as well. It's good to get, yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, everyone have a good rest of your day. And that's it. I'm going to stop the recording and then